Welcome.
Welcome.
Welcome to First Parish, Unitarian Universalists of Arlington.
We choose.
We choose.
We choose to be
A liberal religious community.
Welcoming.
Welcoming to all.
We encourage each other
on our spiritual journeys.
Support one another
through the changes in our lives.
And challenge the excesses
and injustices of our time.
Called to love.
To love.
To love.
And upheld by joy.
We live our faith.
Universal soul, known by many names, guide us to the joys all around us, for the rainy days so needed, for the blossoms of the yellow daffodils and forsythias, the pink and white flowers of magnolias and cherries, for the maples that are about to leaf, for the athletes who are carbo-loading for tomorrow, for their young ones taking their first rides on balance bikes. Fill us with hope that even in broken democracies, the authoritarians can lose their grip. The people working together can reject the corruption, the cronyism, and the cruelty, and that we can share in the celebration of another nation. Call us to action, to welcome refugees fleeing unjust laws in other states, to provide mutual aid to help settle them, not only in their new homes and their new jobs, but also into their new chosen families. To continue to fight for the refugees who are already here, and to continue to side with our neighbors. That even though the job is so big, that there is too much broken in our world, that we still must strive to repair what we can. Open our hearts to love, to be with those who grieve a family member, or a friend of a friend, or even a stranger. To hear the hard news of a medical diagnosis, to hold the hands of someone who is ending a relationship or beginning a new one, to sit with someone worried or excited about a change. And let us not forget to care for ourselves, to rest when we need to rest, to say no when we need to set a boundary, to ask for help when we need help, and to put on loud music when we need to dance, and to be quiet when we need quiet. Please join me in a moment of silent prayer.
Pop quiz time. True or false? You probably heard the story about a frog that is put in a pot full of water, right? That's lukewarm initially, but eventually you turn up the heat. And the frog, by the way, was alive when it entered that pot, okay? So as you keep turning up the heat, the water starts to boil, but the frog doesn't jump out and it ends up dying. True or false? Wow, a lot of thumbs up. Think again. I mean, are you sure that that's the case? Al Gore, in his movie called An Inconvenient Truth, uses the same analogy to talk about global warming and climate change. And the argument was that if it's too late and we let the heat keep rising, that frog, also known as the earth, will die. True or false? Think again. Al Gore was the one that invented the internet. So what is the real answer to that frog at the beginning? The real answer is actually false, according to scientists. So those of you who had your thumbs down, you got it right. And those of you who got it right might be thinking to yourself, of course I got it right. I'm a Unitarian Universalist, and I'm wicked smart, right? After all, our faith tradition, the Unitarian side anyway, grew out of the Enlightenment period, right? So we were the smart ones. We were the ones who thought critically. Again, true or false, Unitarian Universalists are the smartest religion in America today. Think again. Are you sure? Indian American comedian Zarna Garg once talked about her child coming home from school, 10 years old, and she said the child was talking about pronouns in school. And she told her child, "You're Indian. Your pronoun is doctor." End of story. Therefore, the correct answer is Hinduism is the smartest religion in America today. We're number two. We're number two. Why am I talking about all of this? Because there is a difference between facts and opinions. And when we're not careful with our opinions, we could actually treat them like facts, and those who disagree with us as just those who are just plain old stupid, right? How could they possibly think that for themselves? Which is why sometimes these arguments tend to escalate, because we tend to have strong feelings attached to our opinions, to the point where they almost become like beliefs. And when we escalate those strong feelings, they turn into conflict. And when conflict goes unchecked, it could turn into a split, right? Let's take, for example, something as benign as perhaps, should we have Easter lilies during Easter on our chancel, right? Seemingly a benign opinion, but sometimes the pro-lily side and the anti-lily side could clash with each other, and that could turn into a big old argument. So before it escalates to that level for conflict, as sometimes it is called, how do we think again so that we take other factors into consideration? Instead of forming a committee right away to decide whether or not to have lilies on the chancel during Easter, what else can we do to de-escalate the situation? Zen Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hahn once said that whenever we find ourselves in a situation where our emotions are running high and we're having an argument with someone, let's ask these three powerful words that make up a sentence. Are you sure? Are you really sure? And this is the same concept that Adam Grant wrote about in his book, Think Again. It was a New York Times bestseller, and the subtitle is The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know, right? The power of knowing what you don't know. And right on the very first chapter, he says, a politician, a preacher, and a prosecutor walk into your mind. They didn't walk into a bar, but they walk into your mind, right? And the politician is the times when we advocate and lobby for the approval of our constituents, right? And the constituents, in return, try to pressure these politicians through petitions and voting and they lobby back, right? And this is also probably why oftentimes our political discourse gets so polarized. Because again, when we spend all our time arguing about what the right way of moving forward is and versus the wrong way, that's how we get into these polarized kind of situations and an us versus them kind of mentality. Well, you may say to yourself, that's fine and dandy for the political world. We don't have that in the religious world, right? Not in any of our congregations, no. And this is where the preacher comes in. A preacher is when we preach sermons to protect and to protect our highest ideals and to convert others into our belief system. I love my colleague who was a UCC minister. He had a sign outside the door. UCC, by the way, stands for United Church of Christ. Think again. Unitarians considering Christ? Think again. Utterly confused Christians. Anyway, progressive denomination, and he had a sign outside his door that says, "Think for yourself, your minister could be wrong." I know when you use, probably you don't need that sign because you already think I'm wrong all the time, right? So I just found that to be interesting, because again, it's our job as preachers usually to convince you of our belief system and to convince you about what the right way is. And the third P that Adam Grant mentions is a prosecutor. And a prosecutor is the one who recognizes flaws in other people's reasoning and tries to prove them wrong so that they could win, right? So again, there are times when we go through all three of those P professions and act like them in our own minds whenever we're faced with an argument. Those who claim that they haven't are just plain old liars, all right? Because I include myself in that category of I sometimes go down that path. However, Adam Grant argues that sometimes that kind of thinking could make our thinking so rigid that we lose track of the complexity of any given situation. Again, are you sure? Are you sure about your assumptions? Are you sure about the position you're taking? Are you sure about what actually happened? Did it actually happen that way? Or is there another way of looking at this? And when we become so sure of ourselves, sometimes we end up becoming exclusionary. So it's like that hymn that we talked about earlier, that instead of adding another seat to the table, we sometimes inadvertently take that seat away because we disagree with somebody else and we want to argue our point and we want to be right all the time. So, what can we do to counter the 3P professions? There's another one called a scientist. Now, a scientist is one who has a hypothesis, and sometimes, and hopefully, that hypothesis proves to be true, but you gotta have a bunch of trials and experiments and do some research in order to prove that hypothesis or not. And when you make a mistake or when the hypothesis is proven to be wrong, that too is valuable data for a scientist, right? And guess what? It takes a great amount of humility to be a scientist. And let me tell you about my ex's grandmother. I know I talked about her before. She had a book of sayings. Remember my sermon on change and how she said, if you made change your friend, you will have a friend for life? Remember that sermon? Anyway, she came up with two, not one, but two sayings around making mistakes. One is to simply say, wrong again. And the second is, she says, how could I be so wrong for so long and not know it? Right? And again, I don't agree with her politically or even theologically, but I do like some of her sayings. And especially that one, which comes from a place of humility, that yes, we sometimes can get it wrong. Yes, sometimes we do make mistakes. How do we learn from it? How do we grow from it? How do we become humble enough to engage with our mistakes and chart a different path forward? An exercise I might recommend to you when you get home is to go through the areas where you suck at. I could come up with a list right in front of you, right here and now. I suck at ironing, all right? I can't iron if my life depended on it. My handwriting sucks. You can't read it. That's what we have computers and keyboards for, all right? I suck at so many other things, but the point is that how can we turn what we're perhaps weak at as an opportunity to ask for help, perhaps, or to, again, research a different path forward. Like with ironing, I just buy clothes that don't require ironing, right? Or I put it in the dryer again so that'll get rid of some of the wrinkles. Or I just show up to wherever I show up with wrinkly clothes, and people will just have to live with it. All right? So there's so many ways in which we could turn an either-or situation into a both-and. So that is the other strategy, is to take a look at perhaps some of the areas where if we do disagree with someone, do we have other areas of commonality? Like, can we find common ground with our shared values, for example? And let's talk about that and how to move forward as a whole and as a unit in a concerted way. Another strategy that a scientist or someone who thinks differently can use is to simply abide by not just the golden rule. How many of you have heard of the golden rule, by the way? How does it go? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? Well, I think it's high time that we upgraded it to the platinum rule. How many of you have heard of the platinum rule? All right, a couple of you. So it goes, do unto others as they would have done unto you, right? And that requires a high level of curiosity to ask the other person, how would you like to have it done unto you, right? So let's take our hymn, for example, because we pride ourselves in being pretty diverse, right? Theologically and whatnot. But if you dig a little deeper, you'll actually find that politically, for example, we're not that far off, and our range is not that great politically, right? For the most part, most of you would probably consider yourselves to be liberal or progressive. And theologically, we're also not that far apart from each other. Again, though, however, the last survey showed that there were some that considered themselves to be theists and some that considered themselves to be non-theists, atheists, or humanists. And even the theist part, we're not as far off as you might think. None of us are fundamentalist Christians or Orthodox Jews or whatnot in our theological leanings even. So, and let's take a look at the other parts of our identity. Believe it or not, this congregation, as you look around, is not that diverse racially, right? And there's also a survey that showed that when it comes to neurological orientation or educational levels, we're also not as diverse as we would think. Which is why during the Common Ground event that we held a little over a month ago, there was a desire for diversity. And when Hillary Allen, the facilitator of that, asked, what kind of diversity? You all said, everything, right? We could use a little bit more diversity in everything. But what's the difference between diversity and inclusion? According to Beth Zemsky, diversity is where you count people, right? How many BIPOC members do we have in this congregation? Can we count it with one hand? Or whatever, right? And inclusion is where people count. So I was asking my friend who goes to All Souls Unitarian Universalists in DC about what the measurement or what critical mass is for them to qualify as a racially diverse congregation. Is it 15%? Is that the threshold? Is it 19%? What is it, you know? And instead of giving me a number, because again, that goes towards the diversity aspect of it, right? She gave me a response that I wasn't expecting. She said, the way we measure how inclusive we are is if we can sing each other's hymns, right? That this Sunday we may be singing from the Gray Hymnal, which is mostly classical music, and the next Sunday we could be singing gospel music, and it may not be our jam. We may not be able to clap as well along with the beat with the gospel music, but if it resonates with the person sitting next to me, then that's our definition of inclusion. So that made me think about the statement that we have in the blue insert in our hymnal, right? Which says, you sing my hymn and I sing yours, right? Golden rule or platinum rule? Not quite platinum, it's actually golden because the first statement asks the other person to sing your hymn. So it's a little bit of a you-centered kind of thing of, well, you try out my stuff, my hymn first, right? And then, if you're good, I might sing yours, right? But the other, what would happen though if we flipped it as an invitation? I'll do my best to try to sing your hymn, but why don't I ask you first, what hymn do you like? What hymn resonates with you? What gets your spiritual juices flowing? You know, like, what if that were the first question? And then invite the other person to sing your hymn as well, right? Again, takes a lot of humility and grace, and also the ability to be curious about where the other person is coming from. I know it's not as short and concise as you sing my hymn, I sing yours, but again, what were to happen if we were to upgrade it to the platinum rule? I just want to end by saying that rethinking has the capacity to not just rewire our minds and our brains, but it has the capacity to shift us away from who's wrong and who's right, and an emphasis on being right, to being in right relationship. So in other words, it is a matter of covenant on how to be in community with one another without agreeing all the time. And I just want to end with this quote by Adam Grant, who says that rethinking liberates us to do more than upgrade our knowledge and opinions. It leads us to a more fulfilling life.